How does someone apparently so uninteresting, so uninspiring, become Prime Minister by such a massive margin?
Just a bit grey, it's a bit monotone.
And it's not just that guy who thinks that. Keir Starmer has been called bland, boring, unambitious, also a milk tray man, which I've learned is a British thing, I think. But the headlines go on every which way imaginable to make the point that Keir Starmer is like political milquetoast. And not just in a shallow, performative way. He's been called a man who stands for nothing, with the dullest manifesto on record. And the Times called him an enigma, but not in a good way.
Keir Starmer is not the most charismatic or inspiring of party leaders, and probably won't be the most charismatic or inspiring of prime ministers.
And yet, British voters turned out overwhelmingly in support of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, delivering it one of the most commanding victories the party has seen in decades.
We did it!
The Labour Party has swept to power with a resounding landslide.
The Conservatives reduced to a rump, clinging on to just 120 constituencies.
Sir Keir Starmer entering Downing Street as Prime Minister.
If you don't follow British politics, what has just happened would seem to defy all logic. And look, I'm just a guy from Canada following from afar. But what has become clearer in the last few days, weeks, months? No, years, is that Britons have been starving for someone so dependably unexciting that Keir Starmer is just the man they're looking for. Keir Starmer inherited the Labour Party back in 2020, about 4 years ago. And just think of what it was like to live in the UK at that time. Peak pandemic, health services are buckling.
In the height of the COVID crisis, patients were on ventilators in wards transformed in days into intensive care units.
But a year later, Partygate would show the public that pandemic restrictions didn't quite apply to everyone. Inflation made life a struggle, Brexit made life uncertain, and throughout all of this chaos and upheaval, all this inescapable political drama, there was Keir Starmer.
Known to some as No Drama Starmer. Don't expect him to be a flash politician.
Try and whack it. Yes, this is good. And again. That's it. And again. Try and
He's not a fighter, at least not in the traditional sense. And he's not just stiff in front of a heavy bag. His, at times, wooden approach has become something of a meme in British politics.
My dad was a toolmaker.
That line, my dad was a toolmaker, he's talking about his working class roots. Probably the most blue-collar upbringing a British Prime Minister has had in decades. But he uses that line about his dad a lot.
My dad was a toolmaker.
My dad was a toolmaker.
My dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory. It's true.
That last clip, you hear how people laughed when he said that. You know, I don't think it's meant to be mean-spirited. It's just that that line has come to represent how predictable Britons think this man is. And as we saw last night, Keir Starmer is only just now starting to get in on the joke.
Now, I may have mentioned my parents a few times in this campaign, once or twice.
In some ways, Starmer is like most politicians. For example, he does his best to sidestep embarrassing questions.
In an interview with Piers Morgan, you refused 14 times to answer if you took drugs. Could you clarify this?
I had a good time when I was younger.
But he also sometimes avoids pretty innocuous questions too. In an interview with The Guardian, what they bill as his most personal interview yet, he can't really say if he's an optimist or a pessimist, an extrovert or an introvert, what he dreams about, his favorite books, his worst fears. And he's been teased for how generic even his campaign slogans have been over the years. Integrity, authority, unity, stronger future together, security, prosperity, respect. All criticized as banal and forgettable, sometimes even to him.
But it's not just the flag that drives our patriotism. As I said in the speech, it's really the values that lie behind that, the values I've outlined today of security, of prosperity, and respect.
Keir Starmer might not be wildly popular, he might not be widely liked, but he's not feared.
Now, I should say, it's easy to make a caricature of Keir Starmer as Britain's least interesting man, but there's a much more serious criticism of Starmer's uncanny ability to fade into the background. And that is, as his chief opponent argued, his lack of any conviction at all.
Keir Starmer's gone from embracing Jeremy Corbyn to Natalie Elphicke, all in the cynical pursuit of power at any price.
Let me explain what he's talking about there. Natalie Elphicke is a Conservative MP who recently switched sides to join Starmer's Labour Party. Rishi Sunak is calling him out for accepting a traitor, which, happens in politics. But the more serious charge is over Starmer's embrace of his party's former leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Starmer, as an MP in 2016, was part of an open revolt against Corbyn's leadership. He even gave up his post in Corbyn's shadow cabinet while openly calling for a change in leader. But Corbyn was re-elected as leader just months later. He survived the revolt. And who would be there by his side? Keir Starmer, as Corbyn's Brexit shadow minister.
He probably thought, to quote Lyndon Johnson, it's better to be, well, from his point of view, to be inside the tent pissing out rather than to be outside of the tent being pissed upon. So I think that's really a reflection of how he approaches his politics. It's pragmatism.
He's displayed an ability to be politically flexible when it suits him.
And many party leftists who once thought of Starmer as a champion in the fight against conservative inertia, they'd later make the case that he betrayed them, shifting his politics more to the center. He was accused of abandoning the campaign promises that got him elected as party leader, something he denies, saying they've simply been adapted given global events. And the common theme among those who protest his events, you promised us better.
Stop making U-turns here.
We have already... will you just let me finish this and I'll come and talk to you about it?
No,
Thank you very much.
Look, we tried to speak to you about it, but you haven't replied to us, Keir.
True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update.
So how does a man like this, a man whose fiercest critics call unoriginal, unprincipled, uninteresting, how does he become prime minister by the widest margin his party has seen in a long time? Well, it's easier when the government you're trying to replace is as unpopular as it is.
We gotta get rid of them. 14 years is way too long.
I'm fed up with UK politics.
Everything became more expensive.
I can't see a dentist, I can't see a doctor.
There have never been more people homeless in the street.
Put another dickhead in charge, with a great smiley face when he's won, like, brilliant. But halfway through the year, we're back to piss poor again.
There is a widespread perception in the UK that public services are failing. According to an independent think tank in London, the National Health Service is in shambles. Prisons are in crisis. Personal finances are in ruin. Economic growth has stalled, and the civil service is strained.
It's experiencing unprecedented levels of relative decline compared to other advanced economies. There are these signs of real atrophy and decay.
Late last year, one of the country's biggest cities, Birmingham, effectively declared bankruptcy, forced to strip services, cut costs. Even street lights became dimmer.
There was obviously a case to be made for having someone sober, someone, a little bit boring, as a counterpoint to Boris Johnson, who was a bit of a clown.
The UK is probably ready for someone who is a bit less chaotic and maybe even a bit more boring.
It's probably true that if the Conservative Party wasn't in such disarray, some of Starmer's weaknesses might shine through a little brighter and might have hurt his bid to become prime minister. A recent Ipsos poll showed more Britons were likely to view Starmer unfavorably rather than favorably. But the alternative?
We can't go on with this Tory chaos we've had. It's been too much for too long.
Give the man a chance. We've had how many years of Conservative tyranny?
You voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
Keir Starmer, for all of his faults, seems to be, in the eyes of voters, the right man for the right time.